Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Martha Simmons with another session of Preaching and Preachers on Facebook Live and YouTube. Good afternoon. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. Good morning to my people on the West Coast who get up early to hang out with me. Uh, Shout out to the people in the Midwest and the people on the East Coast, and always to my people in the dirty South. Come on in and let me know that you all are out there. Want to make sure things are there. We go. Okay. As soon as I said it, things started working. All right. All right. Going to give people about 60 seconds to come on in. It is a sunny day in Atlanta, and I think there's a heat wave around the country. Come on in. Come on in. We're going to get Dr. Lovelace right back. Uh, all right. We're going to get her right back. Come on in. And when you come in, tag someone. Let them know that they can jump on right now and watch the broadcast, or it'll be up on my page for uh, 2 weeks, and then on YouTube for a lot longer. Dr. Rusaw, all right, she says, I am here for this. We are so glad that you are hanging out with us. Come on in, my people. Come on in. Come on in. All right, there we go. I knew she would come right back. Technology can do whatever it wants to do whenever it wants to do it. Whenever it wants to do it. But we are all here and accounted for and expecting just another wonderful broadcast. I've got two amazing sisters with me today, and I'm just glad that they took the time to hang out with the broadcast today to help the people. That's what my broadcast looks to do, is to help all of us get better. All right, all right. Marquita, it is good. It is good. She says she's ready to listen and learn. All right, when you all come in, tag someone, type in the name, and they can check it out now, or they can come. It'll be up on my page for 2 weeks, and they can check it out on YouTube. Come on in, people. I see the people are coming in slowly but surely. All right, all right, all right, all right. Let's go ahead and get started because I want to give my guest as much time as possible. As always, I'm praying for those who are sick, praying for those who are experiencing a season of bereavement, and praying for countries mired in senseless wars. Please join me next Monday, June 30th, as I close out the month with Dr. Frank Thomas, one of our sages, and he will be talking about preaching, teaching, and pastoring. You do not want to miss him. Let's get right to the topic. Let's get right to it. Today's subject is biblical studies and theology. And let me introduce my amazing guest. First, we have the Reverend Stephanie Buchanan Crowder. Dr. Crowder is the first Black woman promoted to full professor at Chicago Theological Seminary. She was also the first woman and first African American to serve as academic dean at CTS. Dr. Crowder earned a Bachelor of Science degree, summa cum laude, in speech pathology, audiology from Howard University, a Master of Divinity from United Theological Seminary, and the Master of Arts and PhD from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Crowder contributed to the Covenant Bible Study and video series, True to Our Native Land and African American New Testament Commentary, and Parenting as Spiritual Practice and Source for Theology. She served on the editorial boards of On Scripture, E-Feminist Studies of Religion, and Feasting on the Gospel. Her article on yoga, right, she is a yoga practitioner, can be found in the Disciples Women's Magazine. Her first book was Simon of Cyrene, A Case of Roman Conscription, and her second book is When Mama Speaks, The Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective. Dr. Crowder's newest book is Are You for Real? Imposter Syndrome, the Bible, and Society. You can learn more about her at S as in Stephanie, Buckhannon Crowder on Threads or Blue Sky, or go to www. Dr. and S again for Stephanie, Buckhannon C.com. All right, all right. We also have with us the Reverend Dr. Vanessa Lovelace. Dr. Lovelace is Associate Dean and Associate Professor of Old Testament at Lancaster Theological Seminary of Moravian University. Her publications include A Womanist Reading of Hebrew Bible Narratives as the Politics of Belonging from an Outsider Within, Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, and Expanding the Discourse, that she co-edited with the late Gay Byron. She has articles in the Hebrew Bible, Feminist and Intersectional Perspectives, the Oxford Handbook of the Minor Prophets, the Oxford Handbook of Feminist Approaches to the Hebrew Bible, and the Oxford Encyclopedia of Bible and Gender Studies. She is the creator and producer and host of Womanist Bible Talk, a podcast for womanists, Bible readers, and friends. She is a regular contributor to workingpreacher.org and serves on the editorial boards of the Biblical Theology Bulletin and Bible Odyssey. She earned the PhD in Bible Culture and Hermeneutics from Chicago Theological Seminary, the MDiv from McCormick, and her BA in Radio and Television from San Francisco State University in San Francisco. And we go back that long. We go back that far. Dr. Lovelace, now tell me if I'm wrong. Was I your Sunday school teacher?
You were not my Sunday school teacher, but you were one of my favorite pastors in the pulpit at Third Baptist Church with Reverend Dr. Amos
Okay, I
Brown.
thought you were in that young adult Sunday school class. All
Oh,
right, all right,
you're
all
too
right,
old for that, but part
all
of the
right.
Richmond District Bible Study Group.
Richmond District. Okay, I knew it was. I knew it was something. Okay,
Yeah,
the Richmond District with Jackie Hoffman.
yeah.
Okay, okay. I'm gonna make sure she watches this today. She's now in Atlanta. All right, let's get to the questions. Let's just get to it. The We had so many comments because people are really interested in learning the Bible. People are also afraid of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. And so we had so many comments this week as I posted teasers about today's broadcast. And one of the things that I said was, imposter syndrome has us in a chokehold. And we fear we fear the Bible, its contents, preaching about it, teaching about it. And Dr. Crowder, one of your books is Are You Real? Imposter Syndrome, the Bible and Society. Define imposter syndrome and ways that you've seen it show up, especially in Black folk.
Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Simmons, for this opportunity to share and to be in conversation with people all across the globe and with my colleague, Dr. Lovelace. So this idea around imposter syndrome really came about around the 70s, 1978 per se,
Mhm.
when doctors Clance and Imes were really engaged in the study with white women.
Yep.
And so you had white women who were graduate students, and these women were feeling inadequate. They had this fear of phoniness, this fear of doubt, this fear that no matter what they had done, they had not done enough. So
Yep.
imposter syndrome, in essence, is really this feeling of doubt, hesitancy, disbelief, this feeling of faking the funk, if you will,
Yes.
of
Yeah.
this feeling of facade.
Yeah.
It's this feeling that, someone, something is going to happen and sort of pull the Oz curtain,
Hmm.
over us and over our professional achievements and accomplishments, that no matter what we do,
Yeah.
we haven't done enough. And
Hmm.
so, although the term is, almost was over 40 years old, it
Hmm.
still manifests itself. The ideas and the feelings are still prevalent today. And so I became interested in imposter syndrome really during the pandemic, during COVID, actually,
Mm.
when there was so much happening in our personal lives. There was Zoom and all of that. We weren't dealing with that pre-pandemic for the most part, unless we were teaching. But to have conversations and to be on our jobs where people could see our homes and what was private became public, that
Yeah.
became a part of that, facade, if you will. And then there
Hmm.
were also conversations about faculty persons who were pretending to be of a certain race and ethnicity, but
Whoa.
found out. And so all
Whoa.
of these ideas of imposterism and imposter syndrome just sort of came to a head for me. And so again, these feelings of, well, wait a minute, I'm not good enough. I'm here, I'm in the C suite, I'm the first one, or I'm the only one, or I'm the
Yeah.
first one in my family to go to college or to graduate from college, or there's no one like me who is living their queer life, out
Yeah.
loud.
Yeah.
So what do I do about that? And so that's a part of that imposter syndrome, as well, and the ways in which it shows up in women, men, and our siblings who are queer and femme and non-binary as well. So I think we have to think about not just only imposter syndrome, but what's also interesting to me is around the same time that imposter syndrome was, being studied, the term microaggression
Yeah.
also came to the forefront. So
Mm.
you can't isolate those two. And I'm looking forward to additional conversation about that, when we think of imposter syndrome, we also have to think of what are the ways in which systems
Yes.
enact microaggressions against
Yeah.
those of us who are the first or the only, or who are, living out loud, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm. So we've seen imposter syndrome discussed thoroughly when it was related to corporate settings. And like you said, I remember those early readings on about white women, especially in corporate settings. What made you want to expand it though to religious settings and use biblical characters to do it? You used Saul in First Samuel as one of your examples, and then we know about Paul in
Mhm.
Second Corinthians. Say some more about what made you attach this to the Bible.
Sure. A couple of things. I think number one, we're often told that if you don't see it, then write about it. So if, instead of complaining, well, nobody's addressing this or nobody's talking about this,
Right.
well, why not use your skills to write about it?
Right.
And so as I was investigating and studying imposter syndrome, I noticed that there was silence as it related to imposter syndrome or imposter phenomena and theology, imposter syndrome and religion, or any kind of spiritual aspects related to imposter syndrome were not in the conversation.
Hmm.
And so I said, well, if there's a gap there, if there's a fissure there, like I tell my doctoral students, then you need to write about it.
That's
That
right.
that could be your bread and butter. And
Hmm.
so I said, well, you know what? Let me not complain. Let me just put out, a book opportunity and see what happens in that regard. I'm a biblical scholar. I enjoyed, studying the Bible. And I said, well, wait a minute. There have been some spaces where there are characters in the biblical text that I'm like, well, wait a minute. They can align with what I'm thinking about imposter syndrome is. Now, let me say this. I'm not saying that the Bible and the biblical scholars and the Bible authors had imposter syndrome in mind at all. That would be
Mm-hmm.
pure, low down, dirty eisegesis. I'm
Right,
not saying
right, right, right.
I'm just saying from where I'm sitting here and now that in studying imposter syndrome, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I look at the conversation that Samuel has with Saul in 1 Samuel 15,
Mm-hmm.
where Samuel tells Saul, you are small in your own eyes. I'm like, wait a minute.
All
That is
right now.
that's an element of imposter syndrome, that we are small in our own eyes, that we don't think that we've arrived. We don't think that we are big enough or good enough or trained enough or educated enough to be in certain positions. Here
Mm-hmm.
was Saul, the king, the first king, but yet he was acting small. He was acting minute. He was acting minuscule, had a small brain, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have Samuel calling him on that. And what was the reason that Saul was acting this way? Saul said it himself, because he felt that his family, his tribe was small. I'm from the tribe
Mm-hmm.
of Benjamin. We're the nothing tribe. We're the small tribe. And how
Mm-hmm.
many of us, when it comes to our accomplishments, our achievements, we're still looking over our shoulders, still
Yep.
looking back because,
Yep.
wait a minute, I didn't grow up in the suburbs.
Yeah.
My parents didn't go to college, and I'm the first one. And I grew up in the hood, or I grew up on food stamps or on welfare. And, so we're always second guessing
Yeah.
because of our family court and the family dynamics. And so that's what really made me so, wait a minute, let's go back and revisit First Samuel and Saul in First Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
You asked me about another Saul who became Paul, and that's
Mm-hmm.
in Second Corinthians. It's a totally different context, and so we
Mm-hmm.
have to be careful so that we don't get into biblical amalgamation, right? So that
Right.
we just don't collapse the Bible from a literary stance. And so in Second Corinthians, you have Paul who was really telling the church at Corinth, well, wait a minute, you all are treating us like
Hmm.
we're imposters, but we
All
are
right.
not imposters. We are the
Mm-hmm.
real deal. We are the truth. And so it's a very different dynamic in Second Corinthians 6 than we have with First Samuel 15, as it should be, because
Sure.
they're 1100 years apart. So I'll
Yeah.
stop
Yeah.
there and see what additional comments you have.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, you hit it in so many ways, and trust me, some sermons are gonna come out of this. Especially, oh, I know us, especially related to Second Samuel, etc. And I think what you have done and placed in the literature is so critically important, especially in times when Black folk, people of color, etc., are being told all over again, and non-binary folk and trans folk, etc., that you are less than,
Mhm.
that you are less than. And whether it came through your family, through professors, or others, we get those messages that tell us you are not enough, you are not smart enough. I remember Katie Cannon telling me, because she started out in Bible,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then they
Mhm.
told her,
Mhm.
you won't get a degree in Bible. Okay. And basically, what they were telling her was, you're not capable of getting a degree in Bible. And as she and I talked across the years, there were other women, Black and white women, who were pretty much told the same thing. You won't get the degree here. We suggest that you shift departments right now if you want a degree at all. And so those voices are there. It's not just about people themselves feeling small, but being fed that information again and again and again and again, until you start to wonder, wait a minute, could they be right? So I'm glad that you have put this in the literature, because it is in the Bible. It is in the Bible, and it is certainly in our culture. Dr. Lovelace, you did a womanist reading of the Hebrew Bible narratives with the late Gay Byron, who we still miss so much. And you particularly talk about the politics of motherhood. We're crossing a lot of territory today, and people keep telling me that these are the kinds of subjects and things they want to talk about. And you all talked about the politics of motherhood in the Bible, and today why it matters. Why does it still matter biblically and historically, especially under this administration and discussions about motherhood?
Yes, thank you. And again, I'd like to also say thank you for inviting me and hello to your audience. And just go right in. So, I'm going to start with defining belonging versus the politics of belonging. Belonging is that sense you feel at home, that you feel comfortable and you feel welcomed. And we all want to feel like we belong someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the politics of belonging.
Hmm.
There are those processes that people go through to include or exclude certain people, and
Yeah.
who gets to decide. Who are
Mm.
the ones in power to make the decisions whether or not you belong? And
Mm-hmm.
so when we talk about all these immigration and when people said, we went through all these hoops and we waited in the line and we went through all
Yeah.
these processes to go through the right way to be admitted into the United States. And then you go and you let these Afrikaners from South Africa
Lord have
jump
mercy.
the line and
Yeah.
just come right on in after you
Mm-hmm.
said, oh no, we no, you all have to wait. But clearly those in power can make room for who they want to include and who
That's
they
right.
want to exclude.
That's right.
So that's what the politics of belonging looks like. But in terms of what I found in my writings in the Hebrew Bible, and when I was working on my dissertation, is that there are these in the ancient writers, when they were writing these stories about who was Israel and their identity, and around matters of common solidarity, common identity, is that they also, it wasn't about, their identity wasn't about the things that they shared in common, but about the things that were opposite or different from the others. And
Hmm.
so those people don't eat the foods we do, or they
Right.
eat foods that we prohibit. Those people are sexually deviant. Those people, don't worship the gods we worship. And so it was always in opposition to how these other people behave. But I also found that one of the things that was a major factor was gender. And
Hmm.
one of the major, and I fell into this by accident when I was writing my book, A Womanist Reading of the Hebrew Bible Narratives as the Politics of Belonging, as an outsider within. And my last conclusion, I cite Dr. Buchanan Crowder's book on When Mama Speaks, because I didn't know that motherhood was going to be so important in my work until I got halfway through. And what I found with each, as I looked at Sarah and Hagar and that narrative, and then I looked at Genesis 9, and I looked at not Bathsheba, Jezebel, that in each of, and in my article in the Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, when I looked at Jephthah's mother,
Mm-hmm.
is that who your mama was, who's your mama,
Yeah. Yeah.
mattered
Yep.
in these processes or these projects around nationalism and who's a citizen, who's acceptable and who isn't. So if you have the right mother, you have
Yeah.
a legitimate mother, you have a white middle class working mother, or and preferably actually the way they're going about it, not working, a stay at
Yeah.
home,
Yeah.
wealthy stay at home mom with a dozen kids, who's white, then that's the ideal mother. That's
Mhm.
and who's raising her sons to be good citizens who will go out and fight these wars for us. But if you're Black, if you're Latina, if you're Asian, if you're a non-citizen, then you are not an acceptable mother. And which is why they're trying to do away with the 14th Amendment with the birthright citizenship, because it's too many of these mothers
Yeah.
who are taking over and having these children. And that's the problem. And so that's why motherhood is so important. And Dr. Crowder, I'd be happy to join you here and talk about how you looked at motherhood in the Bible.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Jump in here.
yeah, I think for me it started, and then here's this. So December 1, 1999, I submitted my final draft for my dissertation. December 2nd, 1999, I delivered my first child. So,
Mm,
so
mm,
while I was gestating, a dissertation, I was gestating a child. And
mm.
so my sons they've only known that, okay, mom goes to some conference the weekend before Thanksgiving every year. And for those of you who know, that's the SBL, the Society of Biblical Literature Conference. So all of my professional life, there's been my sons and, knowing about this is what I do. And again, what I said earlier, what we don't see, we
Yeah,
need to write about. And
absolutely.
so I came across feminist maternal thought. And you all remember the days we used to have these Yahoo womanist groups. And so there was
Yeah.
a conversation in this Yahoo womanist group, and
Okay.
a couple of the members, their mothers had passed away. And so they were
A
having
like
these.
connect.
And so in the womanist Yahoo groups, there was a conversation around motherhood, but there wasn't a lot that had been written about motherhood. There were a few articles here and there, but no one had written under the framework of womanist maternal thought. I said, well,
Right.
there's feminist maternal thought. And again, we owe a lot to the feminist movement. But I said, well, what are Black women saying about motherhood and their relationships with mothers and their being a mother? And so that's what stirred the pot for me, if you will. I was also in a meeting, and Dr. Vanessa, you may have been in that meeting too. I forget whether it was Boston or New Orleans, where we were all having a womanist gathering, and we introduced ourselves. And so many of us in the room were either mothers or grandmothers. And I was just amazed that here was a part of our lives that we had not really talked about in the Guild, in the Society of Biblical Literature. So I said, well, let's put it out there. Let's see what happens with this idea of womanist maternal thought. And so, yes, talking about Hagar and reframing Bathsheba, because we always talk about Bathsheba as the victim, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we never talk about how it was Bathsheba who was negotiating the change in the kingdom when David was on his deathbed, that it was Nathan who came to Bathsheba and said, hey, there's some ish about to go down, and I need you to help me
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this stuff that's about to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Bathsheba who really navigated the transition in the kingdom. And so I took 3 biblical mothers from the New Testament and 3 from the Old Testament or in Hebrew Bible, and just wanted to look at them from different lenses. And for me, the idea of mothering, not just as a noun, but as a verb. So that, people, LGBTQ plus persons could engage, and so that all of us could think about what does it mean to nurture, to sustain, to support, however you identify, from a gender perspective or from a sexual identity perspective. And so how do we broaden the language and the entree and the foray into thinking about mothering and motherhood so that it is an inclusive term, whether you like your mother or not?
Right.
Are still ways that we can, support and nurture each other.
All right. All right. Dr. Lovelace, you, both of you, but I'm going to start with you, you have been helpful in building the library of womanist biblical textual work. Tell us about that work by you and others. People need to know how womanist biblical studies, how that work has progressed, and then Dr. Crowder, same thing.
Yeah, I think really there was that, I would say around 2015, 2016 was really a critical point in womanist biblical literature. Because one, we finally had reached a point when there were enough of us, even though we are still small in numbers. I mean, literally there are like just 50 Black women in the U.S. who have terminal degrees in Old Testament and New Testament. So
Yeah.
we're still small, but that's enough to write some volumes.
Absolutely.
And so the first thing was when Mitzi Smith came out with "I Found God in Me," and that was a collection of womanist essays that had been previously printed. Most of them, and so I think a few were new, but most of them were reprints.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gay and I came out with the womanist interpretations of the Bible, expanding the discourse, where we not only had all new essays in that volume, but we also expanded in terms of not just those who were engaged with the Bible, but we had one of the articles where it was a Southeast Asian woman looking at the Hindu text and a Christian woman looking at the Bible, but looking at the same text in Revelation on the woman clothed in the sun. And originally, we had invited a scholar who was looking at Yoruba texts. And couldn't participate. And so we were really looking at pushing beyond when we talk about Black women's texts is not just the Bible, but that there are those bibliographies and those oral traditions and other forms, music that make up who we are. And so we were really trying to expand that. And so, and then you had, again, Dr. Crowder with her book, and then you had Will Gaffney come out with her Womanist Midrash, and you had Nisha Jr., who wrote a introduction to womanist biblical interpretation. I mean, and so we finally just, as these scholars started graduating and just putting forth, publishing their dissertations, Kimberly Russell, just it's really proliferated now. And so there is just a really good library of womanist biblical scholarship. Angela Parker, I mean, I can just keep going. And it's wonderful that I can keep going.
Exactly.
Because there are so many now.
Yeah, because we remember when we couldn't keep going.
Exactly.
A couple of people and the discussion was over and everyone's listening. And those who are going to catch this broadcast later, you all need to know. I always get questions in my inbox. Can you name a book? Can you give me books, etc.? As if there are not enough of us to Google. Okay? I don't know. What?
Yeah.
And there are enough of us. Dr. Crowder, what's been your experience at seeing this expansion and proliferation?
No, you know what, I think, Dr. Lovelace hit it. And I think, as we call names, which is always a danger, I think, we would be remiss if we did not call the name of Dr. Clarice Martin, right?
Absolutely.
Because although Dr. Martin, didn't write any books, but you Google her name and you'll see article upon article upon article upon article.
Yeah.
And so that many of us are using in our womanist biblical interpretation classes.
The stuff on the house churches is just
absolutely.
It's gold.
You have to call Dr. Renita Weems as well. Yeah, and so I think there are ways in which it was just two, for a while.
Yeah.
And now, as Dr. Lovelace says, that, we can produce volumes, right?
Yeah.
We can teach a whole 15-week class just on womanist biblical interpretation, not African-American biblical interpretation, but more specified womanist biblical interpretation. And so I think we've come a long way. And I think conversations like this provide a model of what is possible. And I think that's what it's about, that we're trying to teach the next generation. We're trying to teach ourselves out of a job, if you will, dare I say, because we want this work to continue. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I wanted to throw in there, and not any disrespect to our other sisters, but that, this wasn't theology or ethics or church history, biblical studies.
Absolutely.
Biblical studies, no doubt about it. That's what I said. I knew there were just two. I remember when they were just two Black women. They were just two. Okay. So I thank God for the proliferation, and I thank God that the sisters have just, hey, just said, we are doing this, we are doing the writing. And I want to say to all listeners, they've done the work. These are the books we ought to be buying. Okay? These are, we don't need another Spurgeon book. We don't need another Charles Stanley book. And oh, you know, and I can really call that role. Okay. We need to read the work of these women who did heavy lifting and are really getting the job done now. And speaking of getting the job done in different ways that it gets done, Dr. Lovelace, because so often, and this continues no matter what we do, this is 8.5 years of me doing this broadcast. No matter what we do, there's still a divide between Black church and the academy, especially as it relates to biblical studies. So, what you've done is develop a podcast, Womanist Bible Talk. Tell us about that podcast.
Womanist Bible Talk is a podcast that Gay Byron, the late Gay Byron, and I
Yeah.
developed out of the volume Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, Expanding the Discourse. What we found is, as popular and as useful as that book was for seminarians and college students, that the jargon was a little too academic. Some of the terminology was difficult. My mom said, this is a nice book, but I needed a dictionary to understand most of it. And so we were like,
a couple of preachers said the same thing to me, and I'm like, I'm glad you got dictionaries, but go ahead.
Yeah, and so we said, we have got to figure out a way to bring this to the masses and bring it down and make it accessible. And so originally we talked about doing a study guide to accompany it. And I got the job at Lancaster Seminary and said, and so we just put on the back burner. Then it came time for my sabbatical. And I was like, well, what am I going to do for my sabbatical? I said, Gay, let's do that study guide. And I was sharing this with a colleague, and she says, you don't want to do a study guide. That's passe. You want to do a podcast. And I said, Gay, do we want to do a podcast? Gays, we want to do a podcast. So that's what it is. And so we interviewed most of the contributors to the volume. And so if you go out there, you've got different, and I just love hearing from those scholars in voices that I haven't often heard, because it's not just their academic voice, it's their real personalities coming out in those interviews. And so you really get to see or hear them. And so I encourage you, it's out on most of the applications that you can go out to get any of your podcasts.
Yeah. You really do want to check out the podcast. You learn not only about biblical studies, but the stories of these people's the lives. You know how we study preachers, okay? We should also study academicians, okay? We should also study them as well. So that's the podcast, and I really wish there were a lot more biblical studies podcasts being done by sisters, because I'm telling you, the work really, we could add to that. Dr. Crowder, tell us about remapping biblical studies that you edited with Mary Foskett. How can, I know how, the podcast can help pastors. How can that book help pastors understand biblical studies?
Well, I think it's a wonderful segue, Martha. You set me up well, because you mentioned church and academy, and then Vanessa just also mentioned people telling their stories. So I think the volume does both. So let me back up a bit, if I may. So you have the Guild. It's the Society of Biblical Literature. That's the Guild that's been around since 1855, right? And so there are about 7,000 members. Keep these numbers in mind. 1855, about 7,000 members. And about only 6% of members of the Society of Biblical Literature identify as African, African American, Asian, Latino. There you go. So
Hmm.
the numbers, right, become significant. It's still a predominantly white male European
That's right.
society. And
Hmm.
so about 1992, here's some scholars: Randy Bailey, right?
Yep. Yep.
Vincent Wimbush, Fernando Segovia, Gail Yee came together and said, well, we need a space
Hmm.
for these non-white not
Hmm.
scholars so that we can gather.
Yeah.
And they formed a committee called the Committee on Underrepresented Racial and Ethnic Minorities. That's the CUMRIP part.
Hmm.
And so, about 2021, the former ED of SBL contacted Mary and I and said, we need to do something to commemorate the 30th anniversary of this committee, the 30th
Mm.
anniversary of this group that's gathered for their own sacred space within
Hmm.
the Society of Biblical Literature. And so Mary and I got together, and there was another editor who had to drop out. And we were like, well, what do we want to do? How do we want to honor
All
this
right.
representation that is
Hmm.
now in the SBL? And so we decided, well, why not honor the persons who have served as president of
Okay.
SBL?
Okay.
And again, here are the numbers. Since
Yeah.
1855, there had only been four,
Yeah.
one, two, three, four
Four. Yeah.
persons who were non-white who had served as president:
Yeah.
Vincent Wimbush, Fernando Segovia, Brian Blunt, and Gail Yee.
Hmm.
After the volume was published, Musa Dube became president in 2023. And
Hmm.
so what we decided, we said, well, how do we have people just kind of respond and say, well, where were you when Vincent Wimbush was
This
president?
president.
Where
Hmm.
were you when Fernando Segovia and Gail Yee? And so you have any number of scholars and pastors who are included in this volume as well, just sort of reflecting on where they were and how the work of these scholars has influenced them. And it's important because you get to see another side of the scholars. Just as we
Right.
were saying with the podcast, you often don't hear about that. Wait a minute, so many of us are in the church that we're
Yes.
not
Yes.
not engaged in biblical studies because it's something fun to study, but we really have need in this. We have a buy into this, and so many of
Mm.
us are ordained clergy persons
Sure.
in
Sure.
respective denominations. So there's that piece, and many of us are talking about bivocational life. Hello,
That's right.
pastors. You know, so here's models, if you will, to talk about what does it mean to live bivocationally. It's in this volume. It's a volume that talks about race, right, and representation.
Hmm.
As you know, in our churches, we're always talking about race and racism. Here are scholars talking about race and racism in this academic guild. And then lastly, like I tell people, I say, tell your story, not your business. Tell
All
your
right now.
story, not your business. And so you
If
have,
only. If only.
yeah, you have biblical scholars who are telling their stories
Yeah. Yeah.
about, they just didn't, arrive at Yale or Emory or Vanderbilt or Duke, but they talk about their journeys, being the first in their families and the
Sure.
things that they traverse and their journeys of common cloth, their journeys of ordinary everyday makings. So I think this volume has a lot, I think, to say as it relates to narratives and essays for pastors and examples of, ways in which people talk about bivocational life and the way in which people, yes, tell their stories
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not just their business. Absolutely.
So, Dr. Lovelace, we alluded to this slightly earlier of your book. You all feeling that the book wasn't uh, as accessible as it could be for language, all of those kinds of things. So, what can biblical scholars, you're part of the guild, what can biblical scholars do to make their works and biblical studies in general more accessible? Because I got the books and I can read the books, but I also know, and I watch this as I publish, that there are ways to make things accessible and still, of course, offer academic rigor. But so many. I mean, there's several new biblical scholar books that are come out in the last 5 years, and they're not accessible. They're just not. They're just not. And I understand that you have to do certain things to get tenure. You have to write certain ways for certain communities. I get all of that. I really sincerely get that. But for those, as Dr. Crowder said, who are interested in the church, those who are connected to the church and understand that there are people in the church who genuinely want to learn, what can your guild do? What would you recommend to make the work more accessible to the community and the church?
Yeah, I think it was. I keep saying this is who it was, and I hope that I'm right. When I was still a doctoral student, and I went to one of those Quorum lunches, because that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing that they do is to help connect the doctoral students or even seminarians who are interested in doing doctoral work with those scholars who are already seasoned. So it was one of those luncheons, and I believe it was Miguel de la Torre who said, there are some things that you do write for the academy, and there's some things that you write for the church. And I
Yes,
always kept that.
yes.
So it's like, yes, a womanist readings of the Hebrew Bible narratives as the politics of belonging is more for the academy. It is more
Mm-hmm.
for, even though I think the topic is current and relevant in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the way it's written, it stints. But when I do workingpreacher.org,
Yes.
which are it's like a commentary for
Mm-hmm.
lay and
Mm-hmm.
working, it's called Working Preachers for a reason.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
have access to those commentaries. You might have a theological library where you can go in and get those books or commentaries and other resources. Here, in very simple, quick terms, are the Revised Common Lectionary. Through the year, through each year, you can go through and read those, use that information to help prepare your sermon
Uh,
or your
Preachers,
lesson.
make sure that you are all using workingpreachers.org. I mean, there's just no reason. All of the young preachers, all of them that I worked with and have worked with over the last 4 or 5 years, I told, okay, I know what commentaries you all are buying. Know what, but in the meantime, go here because they love to just go online and see it. Okay. And workingpreachers.org is just a very quick, rigorous way of approaching text. And so go ahead. Are there any other ways that you can?
Yeah. And one of the things I think is really nice about that, it's not just all Bible scholars. Some of them are preachers
Yes, yes,
that
yes,
are
yes.
contributors to that.
Yeah.
You have Bible Odyssey. You mentioned that I'm on the board of Bible Odyssey, but it's like
Mhm.
a dictionary or a quick commentary for you just go in and you put in a key term or
Yes.
a word, and you can, or people, places, and things,
Hmm.
basically,
Hmm. Hmm.
topics that you can go and look up. And so Bible Odyssey is another good resource. Other blogs of other, more and more of us are creating our own websites, blogs, podcasts. Not so many podcasts yet. Mitzi Smith also has a womanist podcast. But I think the more we do that, the more accessible these things will become. Because one of my goals was not just that the podcast would be accessible to the ordinary person who's in the church or not. And a lot of my colleagues are using it in the classroom, but I really hope that pastors will use it for their Wednesday Bible study, that they will
Absolutely.
use those stories
Absolutely.
to start the conversation. Because what I found when I was doing the research in to prepare for the podcast, I did some focus groups. And those women said, nobody ever asked me what I thought about the Bible. Nobody
My
ever asked
goodness.
me my opinions
My
on what the
goodness.
Bible and why I read it and why it matters to me. They want to talk about these things, and
Yes.
that the
Yes.
podcast gave them that opening to have those conversations. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the things I really hope that more pastors would use that podcast for. And but and I think um, Louisville Institute. It's offers fellowships and grants for pastors who and scholars who are trying to make those connections between the church and the academy.
Mhm.
And so if you're a pastor out there and you have a project that you're looking for, go check out the Louisville Institute. You might be able to get the money to fund that project that you want to do.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I think those are some of the ways that I would look at in making the biblical studies more accessible.
Yeah, I think those are just great suggestions for anybody, uh, you especially for Bible study. A whole lot of folk don't teach Bible study anymore because they are bivocational. They're working 60 hours a week, and because it's difficult. It's difficult work. Okay, so your work is helping with that process. So I appreciate that. uh, Dr. Crowdy, is there anything you want to say about what your guild can do to
Mhm.
make stuff more accessible to the church?
No, I think, Dr. Lovelace has hit on a number of key points. I think I would also add, that invite us,
Say it.
to different events.
He was at Hampton. Invite her.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was at Hampton, and
Yeah.
so Zoom makes it easy. You don't
Mhm.
have to pay for travel costs and
Yep.
hotel fees. So invite us.
Yes.
And I think I always say it's about intellectual hospitality.
Yes.
As,
Yes.
as well.
I
And
like that.
so
Yes.
we get to the point that we don't have to write for tenure anymore. Once you get tenure, and you've kind of
Yes.
well, here are some ways in which we can open up the meets and bounds of
Mhm.
our publishing. And I think, I've done a lot with Church Anew. You'll see Substack. A lot of folk are using Substack now
Yes.
as a
Yes.
means of making their work accessible. I was in Memphis last week and did a workshop for pastors who wanted to talk about trauma.
Mhm.
They wanted to talk about imposter syndrome, and just,
Mhm.
it was pastors, chaplains, hospital administrators. So I think there are ways in which we have to make ourselves accessible. But again, I also want to say, shout out, say, hey, invite us. And,
Yes.
and and we'll
Absolutely.
come and trust that we'll have the sense to, if you will, code switch and do what we need to do and engage in that intellectual hospitality. Also, my congregation, when Mama Speaks came out, they were like, well, we need to do a book event here at the church
Yes.
on
Yes.
When Mama Speaks. And the
Yeah.
conversation was rich and enticing. I had a woman who was an octogenarian who said, I knew that I wasn't a feminist, but I didn't really know what I was. And
Hmm.
here
Yeah.
she was in her 80s saying, womanist rings with me. That's it. That's what
Yes.
I
Yes.
am. And so I think we need to give our churches, more than we think,
Yeah.
because I think there are people in our congregations who want this, and
Yeah.
we have to be willing, to engage as well.
Yeah. I tell pastors all the time, people really do want to study
Mhm,
the Bible.
mhm,
I have seen this all my life. And I know the Bible literacy numbers at Logos and Christianity Today. I know what they say. I know what those numbers look like, just like there's decline in the church numbers. But when people are in church, especially people who are joining churches that are hybrid churches. People want to study the Bible. And so, pastors, you can, instead of just another revival,
mhm,
okay, you can bring in 3 biblical scholars to teach your people for 2 or 3 weeks. Three or four churches can come together because it's not a problem even paying for people. And you can do all of this on Zoom. I've got a couple of young preachers now who are looking at a summer project. And I hope that they do it. And I hope they listening to this broadcast. A summer project where 3 or 4 of them get together and invite in biblical scholars for the summer, and they're teaching their churches for the summer over Zoom and other platforms. However, we've got to do it in times like these, and of course, my mother would say at all times, but certainly in times like these, we need the Bible. We need the Bible. We need the Bible. Okay. And folk want it. Folk really do want to know. Folk want to know how they can use the Bible to respond to everything that they're watching go on with this administration. Folk want the Bible to help them with that. So invite these scholars who can help you with this. They will show up. And for everybody who said, well, I don't know anybody, y'all come in my inbox for everything else. You can come in my inbox and I can get you a list. Okay. It's really, really simple to get you a list. So we're just about out of time, but I want to make sure in 2025 and 2026, what would you recommend? Starting with Dr. Lovelace first, what else would you recommend for those who say, I want to be a better Bible scholars, and they all want list of commentaries? After 8.5 years, I still get the question. Give me some recommendations.
Ooh, I completely forgot about that one, because there are so many. The wisdom commentary, wisdom commentary. Even though the focus is more on feminist approaches to the commentary, I think it's important not just for men, but for women to hear women's voices, because so many of those commentaries are written by men. They are written by white men, Europeans.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes just women have a different perspective on things.
No doubt about it.
We have different questions and
no doubt about
different approaches to things. And you might find out, I never thought of that way. And so I would definitely recommend the wisdom commentary.
I'll put this in the chat, the wisdom commentary. Keep going, Dr.
Love. Dr. Crowder, go ahead.
Sure. I'm gonna do show and tell. So
go ahead.
Here's True to Our Native Land. It's the second volume. And so the Africana Bible, I believe, also has a second volume out. So they've both been updated. We haven't talked about this. Black Scholars Matter, right? This volume as well. And so it's not a commentary. And I think we have to expand access to biblical scholarship, because we tend to think commentaries. But in volumes like this, like in the volume that Vanessa and the late Gay Byron did, you will still find articles and essays on biblical texts, right? So I think these volumes are just as important as commentaries, right? And because you also get people putting the Bible in conversation with literature and art and music, which, we see many pastors doing as a part of their first move. They'll use a song, or they'll use a piece of literature, introduction in their sermon. Stony the Road We Trod, right, was not a commentary.
It was not, but it's classic.
And we dare not talk about Black biblical studies without talking about Stony the Road We Trod. I'll list this one, The Critic in the World, which is a faith shrift in honor of Vanessa Segovia. It's 800 pages. But you get over 20 different scholars.
Say the name again, the name of the book again.
It's The Critic in the World. It's probably backwards. It's The Critic in the World, and it's essays in honor of Fernando Segovia. And I lift this because often commentaries, except for the Africana Bible and True to Our Native Land, most commentaries are written by, one person. You'll have one person writing on this book and one person writing on that book. But here you have at least 20, 25 different scholars and their works. So I like volumes that have an array of scholars, different voices, people that have been around, but people that have just graduated as well. So I think we have to rethink not just commentaries, but are there other volumes that also give us access to biblical scholarship as well?
No doubt about it. And I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the things, and someone just put in the chat that David Jones said, we've done this for the past. So for that group of preachers who were thinking about doing it, He said Robert Smith, Luke Powery, Valerie Cooper, James Henry Harris, and Kenyatta Gilbert. They are some of the people that they have invited. So I want you all to go ahead and do it. But getting back to expanding the way we talk about commentaries, because like I said, I get the question every single year. I think we really do need an expansion. We are not, and Dr. Lovelace, you've done a lot of work with Oxford, and Oxford has produced some wonderful commentaries, wonderful commentaries. But I am almost most of my life have been a book by book person. I want to see what this person said on Genesis. So I think I've got 3 commentaries on Genesis. Okay, that's probably ridiculous, but anyway, often we are thinking about just commentaries. When what I've learned in my old age is that you really do need to look at other materials and understand how people are talking about the Bible, how they're discussing tropes, how they're discussing eras in the Bible. And those are not typically just in commentaries. Some of the books that Dr. Crowder held up, you need to read more than just a standard commentary. You got to read. This is 2025. The standard commentaries, as much as I love them, they will not get the job done. And you all need to be real clear on that.
Yeah,
They will not get it done if you're preaching every Sunday and teaching every week. A commentary, I don't care how many you got, they will not get the job done. Dr. Lovelace?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and we've got to admit that popular music, how many times have I heard Kendrick Lamar cited in a sermon these days?
Yeah.
That's real.
Yeah.
And so our musicians out there, our prophet poets out there are another source.
Yeah.
Because and I think there's a way, because so many are citing the Bible. Kendrick Lamar does a lot of citing the Bible, that then leads you to go and find out just how is he using the text. And you talked about the eisegesis versus exegesis, but still, how are we interpreting the text? And then be in conversation with that. I think that's good for both scholars and for those and for preachers who are looking to.
I just want preachers to know that it's a different era. It really, really is. It's not just one commentary by Dr. Crowder. It's not just one commentary by Dr. Lovelace or Luke Timothy Johnson or whoever you all, as the old folks say, be reading. Whoever you all be reading, you've got to read more than straight commentaries. Okay? You got to shift that narrative and shift your thinking. There's so many ways and approaches, wonderful approaches that people are using to understand and write about the Bible. That is my time, and oh my God, I am just so grateful to these 2 wonderful women, just the wonderful scholars who are doing the work that we need done. I can't thank them enough for sharing with us and their commentaries all over the place. Someone just posted, okay, they're good. They're posting the commentaries. And then someone says seminarians need lifetime access to ATLA in order to keep abreast of current hermeneutical and theological research. Many of you can get through your seminary library. You can get access or whatever is important to you. You may have to pay for the access, but the access is worth it. The access is worth it. Thank you all for joining me on Facebook Live and YouTube. This broadcast will be up on Facebook for a couple of weeks and on YouTube for God knows how long. So you can check it out there. Next Monday, join me for Reverend Dr. Frank Anthony Thomas, who will be talking about preaching, pastoring, in the academy. Thank you for hitting my Cash App as an independent scholar. And last but not least, what do I say every time? Share the video. It won't cost you anything, and it will help somebody. Share the video. God bless. I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next time. Take care.